So, guys, welcome to a yet another space, Timor criminal space. This one is going to be pretty straightforward. First of all, we are going to discuss the potential for nuisance of the brand new supplemental or aid package or aid uh, funding just voted by the U.S. Congress. As you may have already heard by me and us at the Timor Criminal crew, you already know that we were counting on it. We had a window of between March and May 2024 for the coming up. And I'm going to be straightforward with that in the sense that I wasn't expecting it so late. I really thought that they would be able to wrap it up in March with some of the first packages coming in April, and then some of the meteor packages coming from May, June, July. And that would have coincided with the breaking points of some of the units within the Ukrainian army and the breaking points of some of the departments, divisions, wings of the Ukrainian army, chiefly the Air Force and the artillery, of course. As for the air defense, as I said, the biggest problem with Ukraine right now is the following. They are being helped by a group of nations that do not have never valued air defense as a core tenet of their fighting style or doctrine. This is not to say that have never had air defense. It's quite the contrary. It's just that when you see the Soviet profusion of all kinds of systems and you compare them with the NATO ones, you understand that we are speaking about one group of nations that were thinking about establishing air dominance, air superiority pretty fast with their planes, and therefore the need for air defense was rather an alternative to that. This is very important because now Ukraine is finding itself on the completely opposite position compared to how NATO would deal with a peer or near peer adversary. And this also has a lot to do with the fact that given that NATO doesn't have this vision of an air defense, the production itself of these air defense vectors, call it as much as you want, the way you want. I'm going to call them missiles or interceptors. Is just insufficient for the Ukrainian needs. The other big problem for Ukraine when it comes to air defense, as I said, is that it's protracted, slow, grinding war, which means that some positions are fixed. So you need to move your units around a defined area. This reduces the area when you need to defend and move around if you want to be effective. And at some point, you're going to get caught. And this happens on both sides, Russian, Ukrainian. A lot more painful on the Ukrainian side, as I said. Apparently, for instance, the two last strikes and potentially a third strike today in Aviatorsk area, Dnipropetrovsk, were known by the Russians, given a document we saw today from Alabuga, from at least end of November 2023. So the strike coming very recently leads me to believe that the Russians are using some kind of, I'd say, reservoir of targets they can smack out immediately because Ukrainians are forced to defend in there. This has a symmetrical mirror view on the Russian side. For instance, the recent loss of at least 2 tails and up to 4 in Jankoy is because you need those tails there to defend your airbase, and they need to be within the limits of the airbase. So it's very, I'd say, easy to narrow down where you need to strike, be that with ATACMS, Storm Shadows, whatever you want. So in that sense, those major axes that need to be defended, they are mirrored. Although the Ukrainians are playing island a lot more than the Russians because they really suffer from the absence of the air force. But moving forward with the aid, so basically one situation that the aid is not going to solve quickly is going to be the air defense problem. On the other side, we have something that's going to come a lot later. I foresee that the first F-16s are going to pop out around July, which is the Air Force. And I had a small exchange today with a Albanian friend where we discussed where more or less we would see the Ukrainians deploy their F-16s to be 100%, although there is no 100% with Iskander in Ukraine, but at least 99.9% sure to limit the threat. And it would be probably around Lviv or be down at the border with either Hungary or Slovakia, given that, you know, on that area, Romania and Slovakia and Hungary can basically play recon for that air base, and which would avoid them to get surprised by Iskander. But anyway, this is not that much of a problem. That's not the discussion. But basically, air defense and air force are going to still suffer for a while. This is mostly due to the late preparedness of the Ukrainian side and the European side to transfer F-16s, and of course the lack of interceptors for Patriots or other such systems. The aid is going to help with something else, though. And that's something else, if we are led to believe by multiple articles, is that packages have been already pre-planned. So within 2 to 3 weeks, we might have something like, you know, what happened in January 2023, where over $5.5 billion of aid were dropped on the head of the Ukrainians in order to prepare them for the upcoming counteroffensive. In that aspect, I'd say that while the total amount that can be given right away to Ukrainians, which would be between $7 and $9 billion, is lighter than even the first year when it comes to American military help, and also some other mechanisms placed there, and I'm going to talk about it a bit later in the space. It is still compacted and will be compacted in 5 to 7 months. I honestly think that 5 to 6 months they're going to receive between 8 and 12 billion dollars in drawdown, so PDA, but also recent production from USAA. This is absolutely the strict minimum that Ukraine needs to go beyond both the American elections. Once again, it doesn't mean that Trump wins and suddenly Ukraine doesn't have the money. I really think that Trump, given the flip-flopper he is rather bound to make the situation a lot worse if it's on a bad day rather than better. But with Biden, at least we know what's coming. And what's coming is going to be the same kind of a half-assed bullshit that is going to kill more Ukrainians, of course, more Russians. But the trajectory is set, it's clear, and this grind is going to basically pulverize a lot of the Ukrainian potential going forward and end up with a situation where, while Ukraine is not going to be outright defeated on the battlefield, the situation will be so bad that the only choice remaining for the Ukrainians is to basically notify the Americans that they would like a pause or would like to tap out for a while from this conflict. And the Americans are going to do that in 3 major ways. Probably, first of all, they're going to try and push a peacekeeping mission. This is going to fail. So they're going to unilaterally deploy people in western Ukraine and northwestern Ukraine. These guys are not going to go to war, but they're going to be a kind of tripwire to, try and push the Russians to basically chicken out. Given what has been going on with the Russians, which went from a very, I'm sorry to say it like this, soft approach that they didn't want anything to do with maximalist goals in 2022 and what we are seeing today, where the Russians are indicating a lot more destructive strikes, I think that the Russians are just going to go for it and will hit as soon as possible these NATO troops. Not as much because it would help their war effort, or no, it's not even going to be a deterrence. It's just going to indicate that this time, that red line that they've gone over there is crossed, and they're going to just hit them. Is it going to be a wise decision? I honestly don't think so, because on the other side, the Americans, the Europeans, whatever, their deployment will not be enough to do anything else but become a trigger point, a kind of NATO's own red line. But at the same time, as I said, it would be a major escalation and a major mistake on both sides. Deploying troops in Ukraine means that you are recognizing you're a co-belligerent, although given they signed a repo act of Russian central bank assets in the US, which is illegal. But once again, the United States on that aspect has chosen, despite many things that have been said, to be a rogue nation when it comes to interstate relationship. While the Russians are engaged into what could be described as an aggressive war, I know you're not going to accept it, you're not going to agree with it, but legally it can be argued that way. The Americans are going to steal money, whereas none of the doctrines they're going to invoke for it, so the counterpart doctrine, the countermeasures doctrine, depends how you fucking want to articulate this. None of them allow the Americans to do any of the things that they are absolutely trying to do right now. So basically, for the countermeasures doctrine would mean that you can take over the application of a countermeasure towards a state that is guilty of something that is beyond the international customary law, in this case, Russia attacking Ukraine. But that countermeasure needs to be non-permanent, so basically reversible, and of course, it needs to respect a timeline, whereas you would suffer from that cause. So basically, let's say that I'm in front of my TV and I see some guy on a TV report robbing a store or whatever. And suddenly I go out of my way and basically ask whoever to freeze his bank account if he has one in my country or wherever I can get access to it. This logic doesn't work. You cannot do that, and not even under the universal jurisdiction. On the other side, as I said, the counterpart means that you need to be party of the beleaguered side. In this case, you would be in an alliance with Ukraine. You aren't, as the USA. You would be in a bilateral agreement with them. You aren't. So legally, that's the biggest problem right now. The Americans know what's going on. They know that's wrong. They know exactly what they're doing here. What they want to do with this repossession of Russian assets, and this is one of the main justifications for it, is that Russians are going to lose, or Russians are going to be afflicted by a repayment scheme towards Ukraine. Let us not wait until we reach that decision by a court that doesn't exist, by the way, an institution that doesn't exist. There is no institution currently that can do anything about Russia and Ukraine when it comes to reparations and war damages. So the Americans say that thing's going to happen anyway, but let's not wait until it happens. Let's take them right away, because anyway, when it's going to be ended, the war is going to be ended, we're going to still take their money. The problem, though, the real motive is that there is a huge chance that, in fact, this war ends up with a negotiation which would actually relieve the Russians from paying any reparations, given the way the war is going. The risk is that Russia wins, imposes a iniquitous agreement upon Ukraine, which would force then the Americans to become co-belligerent or right away aggressors towards Russia. This is the risk, the biggest risk with a potential quote unquote peacekeeping deployment in Ukraine. So their justification for what is about to happen is completely legal, and that's why the Europeans don't want to do it, because on top of it being illegal, they need to depossess these Russian funds, the Europeans in this case, from a neutral institution, in this case, Euroclear or Clearstream, depending which one you want. Euroclear is in Belgium, Clearstream is in Luxembourg, for which both sides know very well what's going to happen, and that is litigation. Euroclear is going to get litigated for the amounts it had allowed the Europeans to take over. It doesn't have that amount privately. All the assets that Euroclear has are given from other state actors and other investors. So the Europeans do not want to do that because it's basically nuclear option for their own financial system. Therefore, they've gone for something else, and as I said, it was for the Russian interests or the proceeds from the Russian interests. The problem with this, once again, as I said, is that whereas the money side is important, the most important part for Ukrainians is what the bill brings to the table. And we had this discussion within the group, and the most important thing that Ukraine needs to have is revenue. And whatever is being given right now is not enough. I already discussed it. The budget for this year for Ukraine is over $83 billion. This is the state budget, by the way. Revenues are between 41 and $43 billion from inside Ukraine. Those can go up to 53 to 54 with the European aid and what was earmarked by the Americans, which was somewhere around 7 billion for that. But once again, it's not that easy. And of course, the problem is where's the rest of the money is going to come from. One of the ideas was indeed to get it from the Russians. Getting it from the Russians is all fine and dandy. Once again, I don't care. They can do it. I want the Americans to do it because that would trigger a completely different approach from anyone else within their financial system. Not as much because people are going to flee about it, but people are going to start and try to diversify from it. And there was this article in, I think, Washington Post, which said, was basically the American author. And he said, we are now wielding the power of the reserve currency through the dollar, but wait until we don't have it anymore. Because then, whatever foreign policy we have is fucked. And once again, the main cause for this would be a de-dollarization of the trade. De-dollarization of the trade is not going to happen. Why? Not as much because people are not going to trade in dollars anymore, but because the next choice for it is not the yuan yet, it's still the euro. So basically, two peas in a pod. It's the two sides of the same fucking coin. It's going to take a lot more to get where the Americans are going to start shaking their boots. But doing this would be a nice start, actually, because a lot of people are going to start croaking about that. The Chinese would be the first. Let's say tomorrow, the Chinese decide that they've waited enough and they're going to go after Taiwan. In the US, you do not have 5 to 8 billion US dollars in central bank assets as the Russians had in the US. We're speaking of, I think, over $785 billion. Most recently, I need to check, but it should be around $750 billion. You can see that this difference is huge. It's not that much when you compare the 300 billion with regards to Russian economy in total that were held outside Russia. But still, it's a quite interesting chunk. And if the Chinese feel that the Americans are going to do this to the Russians, they're also going to feel that maybe the US doesn't hold them at the balls, but still a couple of hair from those balls, the American hand, let's say it like this. Guys, do you hear me? Because I don't know if it's working out. Sometimes it happens like this. I had like a strange feeling. So if you hear me, just you can always. Okay, fine, fine. So basically, that move, as I said, is not going to be a direct slam dunk. Everybody's going to flee the U.S. Quite the contrary, but it's going to be the first shot towards places like China or other non-interesting actors, India, for instance, Nigeria. Once again, all these places where the political compass may turn against Washington, and some things may happen which may put these assets in danger. Well, that can well happen. So these guys are going to start thinking twice. But anyway, the most important part, as I said, Ukrainians need money. They will not have enough money right now, even with the confiscated assets in Russia, from Russia in the US, and the confiscated assets proceeding in Europe. The deficit I foresee is going to be between 12 and 15 billion dollars. That might be covered by a potential, I know you're going to be laughing about it, but a potential levy tax on people who are called to serve and will not be serving. But I do not believe that we'll reach the required amounts, as we said, for if the levy tax would be more or less $10 billion. I do not think that Ukrainians have that, especially if this levy tax is once per year or once per month. I do really think it's going to be once per year thing, and then maybe it's going to fucking reach between $7 and $8 billion, which is still going to be better than nothing. But again, it would be a huge takeout from the pockets of the Ukrainian people. Some Ukrainians are going to be affected more than others, of course. And once again, this is the problem that the bill currently does not address. The other problem that the bill doesn't address, of course, is the problem of mobilization. As I said, what if suddenly the mobilization doesn't work the way you intended it to work? We all have the scenes from the early Russian mobilization. They had to hurry up and buy vests in China, get vests from Iran, helmets left and right. Of course, it wasn't the total amount. I'm not going to start saying that, but they needed to like completely change their tune. And also, it was the very beginning of the industrial effort that the Russians are still maintaining right now. So, if we have to discuss it, for the Ukrainians, it's not as much the money that's the problem, or even some parts of the military help, which is artillery, missiles, ammunition, supplies, gear, PPE, and stuff like that. Is also the fact that all this needs to come from abroad. And therefore, I had a discussion with Snake lately, whereas he published this Reuters snippet, where ArcelorMittal Kryvyi Rog said that they were at 25% of the capacity, gave some numbers in raw output, and then they said within the year, now that we have the capability to export through the sea, we are foreseeing to double up our production, and so on and so on. As I said, the problem with most of these articles, especially from the Ukrainian side, is that they are crude propaganda. It's very problematic, to be honest, because we had this debate where they should be around 1 million tons of raw steel or 2 million tons. Doesn't matter. That's not the importance. The important is that For instance, they gave a number for up until there for the production of iron ore concentrate, and the minimum that you need to spend to obtain 1 ton of steel, rebar, or crude steel is 1.6 tons of iron ore concentrate. Normally, for actually good grade steel, not sales, not peaks, as I unfortunately say in my fucking profession, you need between 1.6 and 1.9, roughly 1.8 tons of iron ore concentrate to obtain your good enough steel with a ferrous concentration of 66.6% minimum. You need pelletization, you gotta have losses, blah, blah, blah. So basically, they had about 1.7 million tons of iron ore concentrate with a basic norm that would be for rebar roughly 1 million of tons. And with the reduction, the losses and the rejects, you should be between 0.6 and 0.8, so 0.7 million tons. The factory at hand, ArcelorMittal, Kryvyi Rog, had the output prior to the war of about 6.5 million of crude steel, and that was done with 5 out of the 6 furnaces. And suddenly, with 2, now 4 furnaces, these guys were doing a lot better. As I said, once again, the problem with all these fairy tales from Ukraine is that they seem to completely defeat the laws of nature, laws of physics, all this stuff. But that's not the most important part. The most important part is that southern Ukrainians are trying to sell shit. They are trying to sell because that's the only way they can have that money on their accounts without having anything attached to it. And in order to be able to do that, as I said, you need a complete different set of logistics. You need a new railroad system. You need your ports to be free of mines, free of attacks, and so on, which sometimes is possible, sometimes is not. In the article themselves, the guy from Kryvyi Rog said there was an attack around the month of March, and for 10 days they couldn't produce shit. Well, if the Russians want to do it, the plant is going to be unharmed, but still not going to be able to produce anything. So that's also another part that we need to discuss, but for now it's not a problem. So if we concentrate with the needs that Ukrainians have, they would need at least $90 billion this year. 40, 45, if you stretch it a little bit, are going to be covered by the internal market, which itself has a huge problem, as I said, because the companies are extremely fucking indebted. They have over 63 billion euros of debt. So that's the private debt, guys. And therefore, they are not available to borrow themselves, let alone buy bonds, so basically give money to the state. The only solution for Ukraine, as I said, would be to avoid mass mobilization, but to start drip feeding troops at around 30 to 40,000 per half year. So basically, in 2 years, there should be between 160 or 200,000 people. A mass mobilization right now would break Ukraine. Never mind how they try to not do it, or never mind how they try to do it. The money right now is not there. Even if you transfer the American Russian assets, they're going to end up at 74 to 75 billion dollars with any kind of shit you're going to throw at them. IMF, Russian assets, confiscation from Russian individuals left and right. London, by the way, doesn't still want to do it because my rule of law. So everything that you are seeing in that bill, every single cry out before the bill was voted, is now going to be torn to pieces, and the real problem of Ukraine right now is going to be shown now that, of course, the whole we don't have aid, we don't have money, we don't have anything is gone. And this, you know already, that first problem is not enough manpower, a very chaotic management of the reserve system, a very chaotic management of the tip of the spear units. So in this case, the case of the 47th, which is rather the tip of the dildo instead of the tip of the spear, is, I mean, we can see these guys were battered to shit during Rabotino. They had less than 3 weeks that they were in R&R, and then they were fucking catapulted in Avdiivka, where they got hit and hammered. They caused damage, we have to admit that. And then they were being pulled back for R&R, and suddenly Oceretino goes to shit, and they are forced to be pumped in that front, and they probably are going to lose. I think the latest or the last companies that can be put back together to mount any kind of counteroffensive there. So then, what's the deal with the aid? You're going to say to me. Well, as I said, the deal with the aid is not that much how I see it, to help Ukraine to do anything else but damage Russia. The role of Ukraine with the whole shenanigans in the American Congress and the air defense that was performed at the expense of Iranian strike vectors benefiting Israel, I think showed it the best. For Israel, everything was done in order to minimize the threat. Of course, how long can they sustain that? That's something else, of course. But the optics were awful. Like, you got the one side of Ukraine literally being the underdog and losing strategic assets in air defense day after day because there are not enough of them. And then suddenly you have Israel, which, let's be honest, boasts one of the best ABM defenses, and then you still need to bail these guys out. Everybody who sees this, who's not invested in one or other side, understand the message here. And the Ukrainians themselves understood it. They are not real partners. They are just pawns, proxies, inconvenience, whatever. All these words were used by Ukrainians themselves, by the way. I don't care. From the beginning, we know that this is a proxy war, and Ukrainians are the proxies of the Americans. So basically, what the Americans wanted to do, the administration for starters, is to bullet and bomb-proof the Ukrainian defenses for the next 6 months, because they didn't know if they were going to be reelected or not. And by being able to drop everything that they could before getting ousted, although, as I said, you never know what exactly Trump is going to do. This guy is the same guy who killed Soleimani, tried to make some bullshit peace deal with brother Kim, loved to compare himself to Putin, but at the same time, he started the aid to Ukraine. He made the war in Syria a lot more complicated, and he started this non-stop confrontation with China, which now is just peaking. And it's peaking not as much because the Chinese are openly aiding Russia. It's peaking because that threat that we hold you by the balls to the Chinese financially is where the Chinese do not dare to do what they want to do. I'm honestly gonna admit that the Chinese would like tomorrow, if it was possible, to load the fucking bases for the Russians, let them completely splash Ukraine as a kind of warning shot towards the West that if we can do this just by helping Russia, imagine what we can do to you in the South Pacific. But the Chinese are playing it smart, let's be honest with that, and they are going to use detours and a completely different type of help towards Russia. In this case, of course, you know what it is. It's buying their oil, keeping the Russians afloat financially. And so far, so good. Both parties are finding the way how they want to deal with this. But the most problematic part right now is that if Trump gets elected and we have base Trump, then probably he's going to start doing what he did with Afghanistan. He was the guy who basically launched the negotiation process there and finally ended up by signing these agreements in Doha, which brought the American troops back from Afghanistan. Of course, Brandon completely fucked it up. He fumbled the withdrawal, of course, aided by the Taliban, who did their utmost to fuck up the going home party. But it also showed how Papi Brandon is completely unfit for these kinds of large, coordinated events, honestly. And you can see how badly he managed the aid towards Ukraine. We learned by some very pro-Ukrainian folks that that retard completely mismanaged the replenishment funds over the months. Therefore, he ended up with no replenishment funds and 4 billion of PDA that they couldn't use because they weren't sure then to get the supplemental, or they actually were sure to get a supplemental, they weren't sure how much. But then the whole bullshit of the border and Trump blackmailing, let's call it like this, happened, and then they were stuck with, as I said, having 4 billion in PDA that could be sent, but no replenishment fund. So basically, nothing could be bought to replace whatever was going to be taken 4 billions. And here, as I said, you have the problem where it's not the only case. I mean, we can think about what they sent to Ukraine, Bradley Strikers and Abrams. There was no sustainment system behind it. And Congress looked at that and literally made a very scathing report. And honestly, like, I spoke a little bit about it, but it was hilarious. These guys had over 400 vehicles. And the only thing that was made to have them, endure on the field is like halfway through send supplemental vehicles to just be sure that Ukrainians could operate them and maybe cannibalize them. Like, this is the level of forward thinking these guys had for 2023. So that's what I'm saying. I really think that the Biden administration is incompetent when it comes to these huge calculuses. And the most important trait of this was how these guys apparently run war games. They were good enough for them for the counter. Counter fucked up. But at the same time, the CIA ran these war games and said, guys, they're going to make like 10 to 15 kilometers advances, and that's it. It's not going to be, the front's not going to be wide enough, and it could be some positive aspects that we could put the Russian logistics under threat, but mostly it's going to be a stalemate. What happened is that the deepest penetration was 8 kilometers in a straight line down there. Those are, except for the Vermensky Ledge, are being prodded everywhere else and reversed. And basically, CIA guys had done their math more or less right. Teamwork criminal as well. I'm not going to go back to it, but we had said that if these guys do not manage within 2 weeks to go to Tokmak, the counter is fucked in Zaporozhye, and all the rest is just distraction. And that's what happened. They didn't get nowhere near those targets, and they just grounded themselves to death until they basically threw the towel. So, once again, biggest problem that the Ukrainians have right now is that they have an alliance that cannot help them with their critical issues, and that is, once again, as I said, air defense. The Air Force component is not ready yet, and everything that can be given to the Ukrainians right now is not going to be enough to have this superiority needed to start pushing the Russians back. And one of the things that the Russians are doing well right now is that their game plan that I discussed with you guys for a while now, since at least September, October, which was to have this buffer in front of Donetsk and then try to get this slant Donetsk, no Fuck, what is it? Nova Alexandrivka, Berezivka, and then cut the highway between Konstantinovka and Pokrovsk. Well, I'm not saying it's happening, but just watch your maps, watch everything. I also said, no, we said at Timor Criminal that the Russians were going for the heights most of the time in order for them to dominate the lows, which is logical, and that this would take them a lot more blood because you are always going uphill until you go downhill, literally. And therefore, that's what's happening right now. They have the whole fucking backbone of the rail yard from Avdiivka towards the Cheretine. They're going to continue towards Konstantinivka and so on. But in my opinion, the vision that the Russians have for this kind of war right now, which is, I'm going to hammer it again, it's a historical view of this conflict. It has nothing to do with technology. It has nothing to do with new doctrines. It's literally opening the war manuals of 200, 300 years back and see basically two things: topography, 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 logistics, logistics, logistics. And war hasn't changed, it's just the same, given that we are human and we have finite resources. That's how wars are going to be fought and won or lost. But in this case, that was the most important part: topography, logistics, and lack of thereof. The biggest problem that we are seeing for the Russians right now is not as much no advance or no meaningful advance. Is that everything is going slowly in multiple fronts in a rather large band for the type of tactical units that have been employed, which is mostly company sized. And we end up with this vision that nothing is moving. And then we get a couple of days ago, lost of the whole flank around Pervomayske. Now they have advanced to Cheretino. Suddenly we found them out in Novokalinov, they had advanced. The problem with this grind is that at some point the defensive side is going to break down. Not a complete breakthrough, Kharkov style or early war style, where the Russians completely wiped out the Kherson defenses and Zaporozhye lines to make the Crimean land bridge. No, it's going to be a lot more insidious, because what happened in Ocheretine happened because these people tried to defend Berdishi as much as they could, Novobamutivka as much as they could, and then they got simply stretched out, and the UNPK did its job. I had a discussion about like half an hour with a young French pro-NATO mapper, who, of course, doesn't understand the problem with the heights, the problem with strategical locations. And of course, he's butthurt that the Ukrainians lost probably one of the most fortified blocking points that the Russians could have now. Because now, if you see where Ocheretine stands, they can literally open up, they can go down to clear Novobamutivka, they can go back east and cut on the flank of Ceramic, or they can try and open up towards the north of Ocheretine and start domineering the sides that are under it, pushing the Ukrainians 2-3 kilometers beyond, and then after doing this, they can keep going through the railroad, which is still in the heights, and force the Ukrainians to go down to Progress. Once they are to Progress, they can start cutting up north towards Berezivka, as I said, Nova Alexandrovka, Berezivka, and then you're fucked. Basically, if that things happen, and the Russians can have this huge pit of 5 to 8 kilometers of stretch, you can kiss goodbye Berezivka, because they're going to have fire control over that. That means that Konstantinovka is going to be cut in 3 axes. The one that we already know from Chasov Yar, but that's the front line. The one positive as at Berezivka, which is the southwest axis, and the directly south axis that has been threatened for now over 2 years, but it's not moving that much. That goes through the highway next to Dzerzhinsk, Toretsk, and New York. But once you do that, you literally open a actual cauldron a lot deeper than it should be, but you put a danger from Toretsk by the north, so Chasov Yar, and create this danger from the south west. If you go as far as Avdiivka, of course, which is still far from the case, there are over, I think, 16 kilometers from there now. So once again, like, let's just fucking cool down, see how it works. But right now, what the Russians are doing is extremely smart. On the other side, as I said, the biggest issue with the Ukrainians right now is that their command is fucking up a lot of things. The strategy chosen by the retards at RAND, who said attrition is the way it's going to make this thing work for Ukrainians in 2024, which is stay as much passive in defense, use as less assets as possible, just use your FPVs, kill as much Russians, as much Russian vehicles, and lose as less possible ground. Well, as you know, when you do things like this, something's going to give. So at some point you're going to go in a counteroffensive, or at some point you're going to accept of losing large swaths of land locally. This is what happened with Avdiivka, and the Alliance got pushed pretty hard after it, and that created the situation we have right now, where the first line of contact is more or less compromised / lost for Ukrainians. This leads us to the crux between the arrival of the US aid and European aid, European artillery, American artillery, HIMARS rockets, ATACMS, maybe Taurus, but Taurus or Storm Shadow is not going to change as much. Most important problem right now is that the Americans' only reply is going to try and employ a just longer range TWK to start hitting concentration of Russian logistics, which is per se completely normal. It's literally upscaling the HIMARS strikes in 2022. The problem with that, though, is that, as I said, the Americans are not going to give enough ATACMS to do anything important. The first ATACMS strike was extremely clean and pretty nice. A lot of helicopters were destroyed or damaged. Huge, major destruction. Second ATACMS strike that we know of openly, there were a couple of others left and right, but with very little result, was, I'm sorry, we verified it, we checked over, a complete failure. Yes, they took out half a battery, or a battery, if you want to call it that way, but they spent on tape six ATACMS for a single fucking S300, 400 battery. Whereas they were probably, when you see the pattern of the missiles that were used, looking to disable helicopters and airplanes. So basically, the whole point, the whole tactical point of the employment of the ATACMS was to take out Russian strike assets on the ground. The only thing they did is they disabled a unit of air defense, which is completely normal. We are not describing this as anything else but a failure on the Russian side. But the level of investment for that result was extremely bad. Comparatively, they had the same result with what was alleged as a brimstone strike in Cap Tartancourt in 2023. Meanwhile, the Russians are hitting with 1 or 2 Iskanders, also batteries of S-300, taking out MiG-29s, taking out Raiders left and right. So on that aspect, this is what I meant by the investment done by one side and the result they had for that side is not positive. Now, my biggest problem when it comes to Um, this situation with Atacams, as I said, I'm expecting from 200 to 400 Atacams given for the rest of the year, which is a lot, guys. It's literally a replenishment of the TWK inventory before the war. But the Atacams has a flaw in the sense that in order for you to be able to strike as much as you want with them, you are going to take out available launchers for them. So basically, instead of having a lot of launchers to start hitting with HIMARS missiles, whereas of course you're going to be limited. So tactically, those are a lot more flexible because they can fire. If you have a LRU or M270, 12 of them. With a normal M142 HIMARS, you're going to fire 6 of them. But with the Atacams, with a truck version, you're going to fire 1 of them. So if you want to fire 6 of them, you're going to use 6 different launchers. First of all, that's a huge footprint. But second of all, that means that 6 launchers are not going to fire anything else. So that flexibility is gone with Atacams. And as I said, when we watched what happened with the attack on Jankoy, 66%, 2/3 of the missiles went through. 2 were probably intercepted. There were traces of grazing or hits on both a container unit or the booster. Does it even matter? As I said, they could have intercepted 5 out of 6. 1 would have been enough to fry the S300, 400 battery because they were cloaked together. But still, if they start losing 33% or 40 or 50% of their Atacams at every strike, this is going to be a huge problem, as I said, in terms of the validity of the vectors chosen for the damage they want. So basically, if you start shooting up Atacams and you're having half of the results you want, that means that your whole plan is going to be half as fast, or twice as slower. This leaves more time to the Russians start dispersing assets and so on and so on. The biggest question is, are the Ukrainians going to be left to strike targets within Russia? In my opinion, the Americans are going to say no. Because if they say yes, then the Russians, at the first strike, I'm not even saying the second, the third, the fourth, at the first strike, they are going to unleash a fucking hailstorm on whatever is remaining of the Ukrainian energy grid for starters. On top of it, given to the leaks we had by the Alabuga documents, we see that the Russians have located multiple targets in advance. So I think those targets are going to have visits as well. And whatever the Ukrainians are saying, there is no answer for the Iskander. And there is even less answer for an Iskander with an Overwatch. We saw that the Russians can go up to 120 kilometers with their drones, so they can see at the exact time when these fucking time-sensitive targets are going to be present or not. So far, we have this problem where, as I said, the Atacams is a great fucking tool for Ukrainians. Most of them, if they are 300 kilometers range, are not going to be a PAM, they're going to be unitary. And the only validity of these 300 kilometers will be if they are going to be allowed to hit within Russia. If they're not allowed to hit within Russia, it's just going to be another problem for the troops within the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine. But if they keep, the Russians out of it, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. It leaves still most of the bases where these planes fly and bomb the Ukrainians to shit out of the loop. So, and we know that the Russians will never put a fighter unless they're forced within the territory of 404. So the only way ATACMS is going to be relevant is allowing the Ukrainians to strike within Russia. Everything else, it just makes it a twice, thrice, or 4 times longer range HIMARS, and it will indeed help the Ukrainians be as far as possible for front lines for tactical strikes within Ukraine. The biggest absent that we're seeing from any kind of package is artillery. We don't know who the fuck is going to give the barrels to Ukrainians. Artillery ammunition, I say I do not care at this moment, because what Ukrainians are showing right now is low hit count, still using a lot of clusters, extreme amortization of artillery within specific zones. I already made a small analysis on a couple of videos I've seen, whereas before you would have up to 12 barrels for a specific area. Now you have 3, even 4. And the majority of the indirect fire now are mortars. You have the FPVs as well. We're not discussing about that. That it will remain for a while. But artillery tubes are probably down to 30% of what the Ukrainians would need to defend actively the areas against infantry, against heavy armor, against basic AAVs. Now that everything has been said and done, I said that I am expecting. Also, funny thing, if you followed a couple of last spaces, another prediction is coming more or less true, and that prediction is the Oceratin axis is going to move. Some of the biggest losses that the Ukrainians are going to have these last couple of days. Nova Mihailovka is lost. They're going to lose Netalove. They're going to lose fully Umanske. Now Oceratin is going to be gone. Novokalinov is almost gone. Keramik might be gone. So the acceleration of these losses, be that because they're pulling back due to lack of men or pulling back because they've been forced by UNPKs, is going to hit a kind of peak. And to me, if the Ukrainians do not mount any kind of counteroffensive between June and July to stop this pressure, I'm not saying to roll back territory, just to stop the pressure, then they are going to suffer immensely during the summer, when they will have to try something to, locally try to change the balance. And this is one of my biggest scares I have right now. That is that the Ukrainians do something smart, and choose one small sector. The way they did with the small hamlets next to Malarohan in 2022, start targeting them, hammering them with whatever they have, completely attriting those troops there, and that could be around Kupiansk, and then pushing as hard as possible with whatever they have over there. Not that it would change much strategically for the Russians, but it would force them to panic and therefore relent on other fronts. And that could work even with the current artillery attrition. If they start losing 5 guns a day, but they tried completely a bandwidth of 5 to 15 kilometers in depth, and then slowly, insidiously try to get village after village that they did in Kharkov between May and July 2022, and then after that when they start in September. This is going to be the only way the Ukrainians are going to stop the 2024 creeping offensive on the Russian side. And this doesn't need much assets, it doesn't need much guns, it doesn't need much tanks. You can mount this shit with 100 tanks, 200 to 300 AAVs, mass between 70 to 120 guns. Try to focalize them and be sure that you are going to be supported by aircraft. This also means that it's not going to be happening in Kharkov, because in Kharkov, whatever aircraft is going to come close, it's going to eat the Air-37 in the face. The only way to do this, in my opinion, would be in the gap between uh, Zaporozhye and Donetsk. There you can open something, threaten the Russians, try and push towards Volnovaka and beyond towards Mariupol, and then the Russians might panic. We will have to see how both the Orbat on the Ukrainian side is, but also how the things are going with the fortifications there, the troops present, because you also need to know that that axis would also allow the Ukrainians to sever the land bridge via rail. It would put a lot more threat over the Russian logistics there than taking out the Crimean bridge. So in my opinion, if the Ukrainians are able to hide, mass, and execute a maneuver between 1 month and 75 days in the area, they might have a chance to take the Russians out of their posture they have right now. If they're not able to do that, because ISR, because Iskander, because Russian aircraft, whatever, then the only chance for Ukrainians is to wait until the Russians relent due to their own exhaustion. But that would mean that Russians are going to be relenting due to exhaustion or political goals attained somewhere mid-2025. I'm not sure the Ukrainians want to wait a whole year getting fucked in the ass for 12 plus months with the ratio of losses they're going to have. Because as I said, they don't even need to lose that many KIAs. They don't need to lose 5,000 a month. They can lose 2.5, 3, have 10K casualties on top of it. Let's say 12,000 losses per month. Not all of them irrevocable. That's not the point. But you are at 12,000. You spend 10 fucking months taking 12,000 as the minimum. Well, what happens is that you're going to lose 120,000 people that you need to replace. And therefore, you would need at least 200,000 people to be able to replace those losses over a year. So that's why I'm telling you guys, Ukrainians need to act within a couple of months, not as much because they're going to save the war for them, but if they want some kind of respite over time, they will have absolutely to do something in order to try and have the Russian bear like relent. Otherwise, as I said, you are going towards this minimal loss through attrition. You don't need to lose 1,000 tanks. You just need to lose 1,000 guys. And we saw what happened with the counter. I said, like, if you count the losses within the counter, the Ukrainians were losing roughly less than 8 vehicles a day, and they stopped after 4 months because that was what they had as potential. So yeah, guys, this was more or less the space right now. I am listening to you for any kind of question or intervention or whatever. Sorry if it was a little bit impromptu, but I need to talk about it because a lot of people asked me about how I would. I'm looking at the U.S. help or what would it change? As I said, I personally do not expect much changes from this help. What I expect, though, is from the density of the help. So for a couple of months, the Ukrainians might be able to do something about what happens to them at the front line. After those months, if they are smart, they can start having a discussion with Monkey. If they're not smart, they do what they did right now with Cheretino, then they will have to signal to the Americans to find a solution for the Russians. A solution that would not leave the Ukrainians alone. But I do not expect that. I really expect that the Ukrainians are going to fuck up because they're retards. the leadership. I'm sorry for the people. I I think it would be over exaggerated to say that every single Ukrainian is a retard, but the current Ukrainian leadership is probably the most retarded I've ever seen in these kind of situations. So yeah, okay, let's start with Pete. Go on, Pete. Pete is up to you. Go on.
Yeah, I was having some problems with my headphones. Sorry. Okay. A question. I mean, we've read the fake news. I think in the last 24 hours, that so-called French troops and the 101 airborne, kind of entered, in the Odessa region, this and that. Okay, we know that's kind of bullshit. But the question is, do you think that outside intervention would come in to kind of defend Odessa, because if they don't, I mean, then Ukraine becomes a landlocked country, and then it's basically game over as a kind of a global kind of trading partner or whatever. Do you think that is feasible, or do you think that everybody outside of the Ukrainians will stay out of the fight, except for the mercenaries, of course?
To be honest, the Odessa conundrum, I've already made a part of a space over that. Anything that would try to go through Odessa without taking out the Pridnestrovye Republic is going to have a huge problem, because, as I said, there are very little passages there. One of them is the Zatoka Bridge, which is unpassable, and the other side is that you will need to start staging a lot more troops than currently. The current French contingent there is between, like, I think 5,000, 6,000 troops with the extra NATO force. If you add about 4,000 Americans, you can have 10,000 people that would need to cross into a nass of roughly 3 kilometers. We have seen what the Russians did more recently, around the month of March, when they addressed via Iskander a small warning about what they wanted to do around the area. And if that's the plan, then it's pretty bad. But any kind of intervention in order to sustain Odessa would be happening with a naval force. That naval force would have to cross the Bosphorus. Then you would know that the game is up. And the Turks so far have been, despite their duplicitous trades and all this shit, have been extremely clear that they do not want a extension of the war in the Black Sea, because in order for these ships to, make port of calls and have supplies and stuff like that, they would have to go towards Turkish or Bulgarian or Armenian ports, which means that they would be liable to strikes. And I already explained this: strikes in the Black Sea for the Russians can come from any kind of directions, given that they are not too far when it comes to the Turkish coast towards from the Russian coast. And I do not think that the Turks would allow that. If the Turks allow that, then you know that it's a NATO-Russia war. And then, guys, as I always said, it's time to buy yourself a bunker, or take a plane trip to, I don't know, Bahamas or in Africa or somewhere where the radiations will not get you fast enough. But that kind of war, which would mean that the whole alliance would go after Russia, as I said, would turn the tide from a aggression war that can be described for the Russian intervention in Ukraine towards a defensive war, which legally would open NATO and France to basically a complete lack of legal posture. And a legal posture would mean escalation, and would mean, as I said, probably a limited nuclear exchange, just so everybody understands what we're talking about. And of course, this limited nuclear exchange is going to happen in Europe, probably some bases in Poland, probably Ramstein in Germany, probably a couple of points in Bulgaria and Romania, just so everybody's fine. and of course a counter-strike somewhere in Russia, and then either it stops there and people start talking, either we go to a escalation, and then it doesn't matter where it strikes, it's going to hit us all in Europe. As for the purely conventional intervention, for Odessa, the problem is that you will need to fire from Romania and Bulgaria in order to be able to cover those troops. But you cannot stop the Russians from, as I said, completely filtering the passage towards one side of the Zatoka bridge to the other. That means that you will have to go through Moldova. That means that you're going to have to first fight a small war against Pridnestrovye, or try to go around through Romania. That's, as I said, it's 500 kilometers extra in logistics, and still you are dependent on that choke point through Zakarpattia. So generally, it's a very bad plan tactically if it goes just to defend Odessa. But then there's another problem. How do you get to Odessa if you're Russia? And in order to get to Odessa, you will need to do so many wild things, which is go back to the northern part of Kherson Oblast, which means crossing the Dnieper, which means that you will have found a solution to the current problem for the Ukrainians, which is absence of bridges. You're going to pontoon, but that means that for some reason Ukrainians cannot hit your pontoons with HIMARS or whatever. This means that somehow you would have crossed from Zaporozhye and you are hitting them from the side. So in order for Odessa to be threatened as it stands right now, a lot of wild things need to happen. And if those things really happen, then defending Odessa would be pointless, because you would have lost Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk, and the guys are going towards Kamyansk and Kaniv, which means that like the Dnieper has been forced, and it doesn't matter where you're going to defend next. You're going to have a complete opening up of Russian forces in the center of Ukraine, which, as I said, would require the attention of every single Ukrainian force beyond the Dnieper, if anything remains. Like those guys would need to go and choke where the Russians are crossing, which means a huge logistical endeavor for themselves as well, which means also that the air defense on those areas will have completely gone out. So the situation, if the Russians are able to threaten Odessa, would be so critical for Ukraine that it wouldn't matter defending Odessa. What would matter is having the Russians agree to a ceasefire and try to discuss how much of Ukraine they're going to get. So on that aspect, if you look at purely from the logistical, topographical, and military point of view, if the Russians are at that point, you do not need to deal with Odessa anymore. Ukrainians would have way bigger problems. But if you still are at that point, the French and the Americans try with 10,000, 50,000 people to do what I think they would try to do without taking PMR, that's suicidal. And honestly, then let them do it. But I do not think that it would be a very wise attempt. And I do not think that the French leadership, military leadership, would allow it. If Macron really goes that crazy, then I think you're going to have at least some kind of local mutiny, because it would make no sense. It's simply like the French forces that would be required to force anything there would require the whole heavy asset arsenal of the French army, which is like 2 full regiments of armor and IVs. And those, given the losses the Ukrainians are sustaining right now, would last maybe a month or two. And then what? Who is going to produce the replacement for those? So that's the greatest advantage the Russians have right now. If the push comes to shove that far, then Odessa is really not a problem. Sorry if I was a bit longish.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't see this conflict ending, with Odessa not being Russian, because I mean, from Odessa they can literally lob, right over to Sevastopol. So I mean, do you see this ending, with Odessa remaining in Ukrainian hands? Because I don't.
Well, the thing is that I already said, Putin said openly, "I want Odessa. Odessa is a Russian city." Then Lavrov started with Kharkov again. So what they are discussing and what they're capable of doing are two different things. But if the Ukrainians keep going the way they're going about defending Donetsk and Luhansk or the Donbass area with this much disregard for their own capabilities and force regeneration, then, as I said, probably the Russians are going to find the way to force the Dnieper. And once they force the Dnieper, and one of these solutions is, as I said, to use Zaporozhye to force the Dnieper, which has not only one bridge but has three, then you got a huge problem because then you can again drain part of the Nikopol area and have them cross over there. But if you check the latest, I think it was the Washington Post or New York Times, I don't know, graphic article, you can see that Ukrainians have started building trenches over, I think, 220 kilometers of trenches already on Kherson Oblast, uh, 15 to 20 kilometers beyond the Dnieper line. So they are expecting something there, and as I said, they are going to lose enough troops to start being empty on whole areas of their defensive system, and therefore, at some point, it's true that the Russians are going to just go to the Dnieper and force it, and the easiest way to do it is Zaporozhye. And this is why I'm having the same idea. If they cross to Zaporozhye, then you don't need to bother about like once upon a time Nikolaev and cross at the closest pit to Kherson, because as I said, then you're going to be able to control the Energodar basin. You're going to be able to dam it, make bridges to them, and Ukrainians are going to be so low in manpower and capability that a lot of that thing is going to be gradual, but still going to happen. So if, as I said, if the Ukrainians persist into this mindless defense of some areas in Donbass, which is attracting them as much as it's attracting the Russians, it will come a point where you would be absolutely unable as a Ukrainian military leadership to coordinate anything else but a slow rollback towards central Ukraine. And then, as I said, once you are there, the time would be to discuss with the Russians what they want, not discuss their terms of surrender or beating them. And so, if the situation is that negative for Ukraine, then of course you will have to discuss what do you want to do with Odessa. And one of the solutions, in my opinion, would be to make Odessa a frank city, which is non under Ukrainian control. Uh, Make it kind of free zone or whatever you want to call it, like during the interwar period. But if the situation is that bad, the Russians for sure are going to start discussing the fate of Odessa. But I'm sorry, but we are far from there. And the thing is that first Ukrainians need to be taken out of Donbass. Once they're out of Donbass, as I said, this creates a lot more problems for them in order to sustain the push towards Zaporozhye. So first things first. If that thing happens, that the Ukrainians cannot sustain these creeping offensive moves from Russia, then I'm telling you, you don't need to start overthinking about Odessa. You need to start thinking about how much the Ukrainian army is going to be able to resist in central Ukraine, because finally, if they lose Zaporozhye and they lose Dnipro and Kharkov is under attack, then it's done. It's over. You don't need Poltava, you don't need Kiev, you don't need Chernigov, you don't need Sumy. You are going to take out over 60% of their current industrial capability if you take Dnipro, Zaporozhye, and Kharkov. You already have Donetsk, you already completely cleared Avdiivka, Mariupol is out when it comes to coke and steel production. Ukraine is going to be like 40% industrial of what it ever used to be. And with that kind of potential, It doesn't matter if they have Odessa or not. It doesn't matter if they have Nikolaev or not. It doesn't matter if they have Yuzhny or not. They are losing what they need to sell. They can have access to the sea, but if you saw what the European Union had published as export from Ukraine, their biggest portfolio category was steel and steel products and metal products. And I think the easiest way for the Russians is to disrupt the power system, take out most of these export-friendly industries, although they're extremely, I'd say, given I work in the sector, they're extremely unprofitable in the long term for Ukraine, especially if they want to get to the same standard as everyone else in the sector, Chinese, Russia, Japan, and so on. They're extremely labor and investment intensive. So for Ukraine, whatever was happening until now was mostly due to the fact that they have nothing else to sell except agricultural products, some steel, and of course the human factor, which is migration, most of it, and labor. Sorry if it was a bit vague and long, but the point is that for Ukraine to be in that situation, as I said, the risk of the Russians crossing the Dnieper means that Odessa is already history. Let's say it like this. Everybody else, guys? Okay. Well, what can I say else? Of course. Come on, General. Up to you, man.
Hey, good evening. I still wanted to discuss the possible S-200 into the equation. What do you think? Are you still positive that it was not it?
I'm 100% positive it wasn't it because I'm just after him. I'm letting you speak. Don't worry, bro. I'm 100% positive because nothing works with that. Um, One pro-Ukrainian commenter said that you can see there is damage in the wing, flame on side. I don't agree at all. If you see the flat spin, and I took a screenshot from the video, of course the quality is not the best. You can see that both wings are in one piece. That the fire is clearly coming from outside the right engine, which means that there was a burst on the hydraulic control of the probably the thrusters. And that thing, as usual with this, just burns burns the plane down. And ironically, there is more damage done by the OSA that the Georgians used to hit a 222 MR in 2008, which hit just under the body and completely ripped part of one of the engines. And that one happened in low altitude, and I think it was 8 kilometers from the nearest front, and it was the plane was being used as.
I think it was a Ukraine donated book in that case, not an OSA.
Actually, that's the problem because a lot of people say it's book, but the only video that is on YouTube saying that this was the position which fired it, you can see the missile is not big enough to be a book. But the same thing, be that a book or or OSA, the logic is the same. Book has a maximum 70 kilogram of payload for the missiles. The Su-200 has 220 kilograms of payload. If that that S-200 hit anywhere close to the plane, given the extreme expanse of the warhead, it could have probably crippled the wing in half or something. When the flat spin is visible within 200 to 300 meters from the ground, you can see that the plane is 100% intact. And the problem is that where is it shot down? The Ukrainians said 308 kilometers. That's not the truth. The reality is that even the shot down area would be at over 380 kilometers. And there's also this thing that you just shot something with an S-200 and it flew for 100 kilometers before completely being blown out. This doesn't make sense. If that was the problem, that the plane was hit at 308 but falls down at 430, if you check where it is, so basically it was trying to get to base, they could have dropped in Taganrog. Of course, it would have been nice, but they would have saved the plane themselves. It's a way closer. And of course, you got the variant where 850U was also in the area, about 60 kilometers in front, and they didn't hit a fat, juicy target like that, but they went and hit a 222 M3. Listen, the problem with the GRU is that they have lied so much in this war, and their technical acumen is completely shit. They spoke about the Serpukov, about being this fire. We see the Serpukov in maneuvers like 4 or 5 days after. Are supposed to have burned a helicopter in Samara. Images appeared of the helicopter. It was scarred and charred, but both retired teenagers were caught. They were supposed to have burnt a Su-34 during the winter. The plane was fine. Now they tried an attack on the Komuna ship, and we have the images that the Komuna was probably burned with shot down debris of the Neptune or whatever missile they used. They made up 14 different Su destroyed in the attack of the Morozov air base. Nothing. They made up 14 other Su destroyed over 10 days or something in order to make this completely unfounded victories. They took credit for the A50. They took credit for A50 number two. They took credit for the two. I think it was the Ilyushin 20, and the pattern is clearly of a book. So where the fucking Ilyushin 20 would have been hit by a book over 160 kilometers from there, like the problem with people engaging in GRU Tsipso is that it makes me fucking want to puke. These guys, their whole shtick in this war has been PR. And sometimes it has worked, like when they sent a unit in civilian disguise to take out 1222 M3 on an airbase up north. And then that team, when they were trying to get out of Russia, got ambushed and killed completely. I'm sorry, but I mean, this is the kind of institution you're talking about. Now, is it possible? Is it probable? Is it something that happened? I don't think so. I really think was bullshit, and because every single thing that they made up after fact came after the video appeared. If they knew they had shot it, they would have prompted telemetric data. They even faked telemetric data with the Su-34s when they said that they had heard COSPAR radio, so basically SIR beacons. Suddenly, we don't have anything like that. We just have an interview from Budanov, literally I think a WhatsApp message from Yusuf in his fucking car, and then this fake shit S200 Polish S200 cabin where somehow they shot down the 222 M3 and they didn't shot it out before it fired its missile. So at the nearest point, they shot it out while going out. Like, come on, man. Like, let's be honest here. I'm not gonna say that's impossible because somehow it happened with the Siberian Airlines, but the Siberian Airlines had no fucking idea it was being shot at. But nothing can explain the claim, except, of course, the fact that 222 M3 had a malfunction, had an onboard fire, and fell, and two apparently crew members are dead. But what else What else is there? Did they prove telemetry data? No. Did they show a fire position? No. Where is this S-200 located if they want to shoot at 308 kilometers? When you put this straight line, 300 kilometers from the most concealed position would be 30 kilometers after the contact line. And you would have shot it over Taganrog, more or less, a bit further than Taganrog. I'm sorry, bro. If those guys get hit over Taganrog, they land in Taganrog. They don't try and fly up to Stavropol back again. There are all these little things that make me completely go mad. But in a sense, what can I say? Apparently, you were caught, so I'm really sorry. I'm going to put you back in. I'm sorry, General. I didn't know that you were disconnected. But basically, this is
I
what
will
I think.
just make an annotation, and that's it. Thank you for the answer. Previously, you know that they shot the S-200s in a ground-to-ground way,
Yes.
so they just wasted them, and so they have them. And the second thing I want to say is that Kiev had a pretty good competency in radio electronic, having the school there. And I think they might have managed to do something. And maybe they even realize that it's a better use trying to have some lucky shot. Because I think that if it's the case, it has been a lucky shot, than shooting them in a ground to ground ballistic way. So I I don't know, man. But
No,
we have to know, maybe
am I
in
being
the
100% sure that it's not a S200? I don't know either. I wasn't there, so I cannot tell you. But everything makes me point to what they are giving us technical data, the lack of real telemetry, the lack of damage pattern on that plane flat spinning. All this, all this makes no sense. If if we have to believe what Budanov says, though, basically 308 kilometers of interception, and we put them at the fucking contact line, be that in Donetsk, be that in Zaporozhye. I'm not saying 20, 30, 40 kilometers behind the line, because I would suspect them to be around Pokrovsk like usual, because there are retards like that. But put them on the line, it would still make it that that plane flew over 60 kilometers with a fucking engine on fire, and instead of going anywhere else closer, which is even going back, going low to Taganrog in order not to lose power, they flew high, which means a worse chance to recover the plane anyway. And this is what I'm telling you, that if Budanov would have stopped his fucking mouth from saying bullshit, I could have even contemplated that indeed it was a lucky shot with the S-200. But because he gave that fucking number, and because we're not stupid. Today we had a discussion with the F-16. You told me, and I said with the 120 IM-120C, I see them firing from Bashtanka. I see them firing from Pokrovsk or Mirgorod. I see them firing from cover in over Zaporozhye, or even over Dnipro if the Russians are stupid enough and come close enough with the Su-34s. So I'm not the kind of irreasonable guy who would say, no, that's not possible, I don't believe. If Budanov would have said that bullshit with 308 kilometers, and this is what gets me, anything else I would have been ready to consider. And now I'm literally, because it makes me, I'm sorry, bro, it makes me a bit, I'd say, pissed off, but I have the exact location when it fell. Let's say that it was flying, in order to get to Mariupol already from the place of crash, you are at 291 kilometers. So if we put the fucking firing place in Pokrovsk, we are at 400 and something kilometers. If you deduct 308 from Pokrovsk, just like, I know it's a bit annoying, guys, because we're getting to something that's a bit technical and probably annoying for a lot of people. 308, they would have hit them at Timachovsk. And in Timachovsk, the first thing the guys would have been doing is going to Morozovsk or going to Krasnodar. Yep, going to Krasnodar would have saved them 30 kilometers instead of falling in, I think it's Novolabinskaya towards Stavropol. So these guys would have been alive if they went down to Krasnodar. The engine would have been that much destroyed. No, for some reason they went over Luslabinsk and they literally fucking died. 2 guys out of 4. This, in my opinion, makes no fucking sense. And this is fine from Pokrovsk. I'm not saying fine from somewhere else. Like, let's say they're gonna fire from Ternivka or Petropavlivka or Petrotravensk. And because then Petrotravensk, for instance, which would be the clearest because it's the highest, would have shot them down at Kanevskaya. And at Kanevskaya, they can even fucking turn, make a U-turn and go to Yeisk. And they are still at 380 kilometers. Or they can go straight to Krasnodar. It makes no fucking sense what happened. It makes no fucking sense, and this is one of the things that a lot of people are gonna say, yeah, but because it makes no sense, because they had so many options, they thought that it could survive. No, honestly, what I think is that it was a fucked up moment. Something happened with that plane, technical, and of course the Ukrainians, which are extremely smart with that, extremely fast, took responsibility and try to take advantage of that. And of course, because there are people like you and me who would fucking always have this doubt about, but maybe they've won their bet there because it's already out of the bag. We have this discussion, so we give
It's a
credit.
perfect case scenario. I understand what you're
Yeah,
saying,
yeah, yeah.
but the only case which I think is maybe it had a little damage, not a big one, and why didn't it go to a near airfield? You know, every plane has, I'm saying in Albanian, coefficienten e planerimit me
Yeah,
shpejtësi dhe
I
lartësi
know, I know, I know.
caktuar, the glide path.
Yeah.
So maybe they had some defect in the flight control, so they needed to go, I mean, for that airfield, and they just didn't make it finally. So, okay, it's a perfect case scenario, but it's okay. Thank you. Just go with the other people because
No, no,
this
no, no, no.
seems like
No. Listen, listen, listen. This is the thing that's exactly why I'm still discussing it. If it was a 0-0 for me, I would say, you know what, this is bullshit. And I had discussions with pro Z people about things that I consider completely out of the fucking reality. But in this case, we are having this discussion because it's still possible. And the most obvious case was the Siberian 1821. The problem with that is that it's true that you're going to try and make it, but at the same time you do not have control on the the liquescence of your aircraft, and therefore the first thing I mean, okay, I've been a tanker. It has nothing to do with planes. But the problems I always had when I had something that was going full, mostly overheating of the engine, or the gearbox going sideways, or we just like through a track. Um, the point was reducing the damage to the basically the chassis. tracks, for instance, where this was the worst part, worst nightmare. Not because most of the time I didn't have much to do, but I needed to be there and not notify that we have this problem, and then sit there and watch the guys do the retracking, the retentioning of the track. But the point was not to, once you felt that the track went sideways and you detract or you need to short track, whatever, was to stop immediately. I would literally fucking scream through the fucking metal for the driver to stop, because the one thing I didn't want is the track to go, the tank to go too far off the track, because then you plow it, like once you plow the tank, oh my god, then you're gonna have a lot of problems. You need to start digging under wherever you have plowed on the wheel, and it was a loss of time. This is just to say that if I am the flying personnel on that 222, be that the commander or whoever, the only thing I don't want, because you're on the air, so the only way to get out of that plane is to parachute yourself. But we saw that by stalling the plane, having this flat spin, you are making your egress from the plane a lot less possible. Hence the fact two of them died, which makes me think that if it happened that they thought that they escaped this missile and everything was fine, but suddenly they realized they were hit. And the first thing I would think at that moment is like, fuck, we need to land, because if we're losing parts, maybe we're gonna lose the engines, and if you lose the engines, you know what happens. And we had this case. One of the things I wanted to actually talk about is with the test Ilyushin 76 900 that had a bird strike or had an incident with the engine. The engine fell off, and then the fire spread to the whole wing, and finally it crashed, and everybody on board died. This is the case scenario I was telling you. If you let your avari spread into the plane, you lower your chances of making it out. So I have a huge problem believing that these guys, either, as I said, it was maybe a very little contact, and they said, okay, it's fine, nothing happened. And then, because they're flying supersonic, within 30 seconds or 1 minute, the damage was obvious. But, if you're flying at 30 kilometers per minute, then of course you are already a minute away and your plane is falling to pieces. So that also is understandable. But in my opinion, I think it's less. Maybe they took a chance, but they took a chance because they were hit. They took a chance because there was an avari in the plane. So even that part doesn't make it sound that it was a contact. It's not that I don't want to believe. It's just like once again what Budanov said, and the locations of the events. It's like, as you said, it would be a 1 in a million shot. Is it possible? Theoretically, yes. Is it plausible? Honestly, no. And this is what I don't want to close the discussion by saying, "Oh, I believe it's no," and it's no. It's just that it doesn't make sense in my experience. It doesn't make sense from the location. It doesn't make sense on how the Ukrainians themselves produced the lack of evidence and just like went with, okay, we did this. Sorry, guys, it was a bit longish, but I just don't want anybody to think that I'm closing my mind to this based on the potential of this happening. I'm closing my mind, or at least I'm closing the discussion for myself on the part that we have professional liars. Of course, the Russian Ministry of Defense are also bullshitted, so on that aspect, but we have professional liars doing what they are paid to do, which is lying and getting information out there that would steer a discussion that doesn't need to exist in a sense. But yeah, I do not believe it. I still have a huge mental barrier there to believe that someone that well trained and that used to fly that bird would make this basic mistake of trying to make it, although they are, according to what Budanov said, over 100 kilometers, which is 3 full minutes of flight at maximum speed. And if you lower that speed, you're going to be at 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, sorry, guys, it was long. Z, please, your time.
Hello. So I have a question regarding the war. So if we look at the latest package from the USA, it seems that from an equipment perspective, it's there is a commitment, and the USA seems doubling down on Ukraine. So if there will be like a breaking point, it would be on the manpower side. And if we are looking at this, Russia, I think it would not be advisable to launch a big offensive while Ukraine still has enough manpower to face Russia. So my question is, when do you think Ukraine will reach a breaking point on the manpower? And if that happens, and Russia launches a big offensive, what would be its aim? Because right now it's just attrition, small villages, one by one, etc. So if there is an issue on manpower, real issue on manpower in Ukraine, and then Russia launches its big offensive, when this manpower issue will arrive, and what would be the aims of the big offensive if it happens? Thank you.
Well, the thing is with the Ukrainian manpower, as I said, that they already have a huge manpower problem, but they don't have that manpower problem in the same way that that manpower problem would be posed if there was a, sorry to say it like this, a second Russian army coming from them. Like you would have the invasion army or the 24th February army ready to go right now. If that army on Russian side would exist, inshallah, walks now into Ukraine, never mind which side, you are going to have a complete breaking point in the Ukrainian military. How far would it go? Probably, as I said, a huge swaths up north are going to go. Probably they're going to re-enter Kharkov, take it. I don't know, but they would re-enter Kharkov. They would probably make Sumi regret everything that happened in 2022, and probably they're going to go back to Chernigov because only one bridge is still available there. So in that aspect, if there was such a concentration of forces ready to go in Russia, the breaking point is today. But we know that the Russians themselves have chosen something different, not by choice as much as by being forced due to the ISR situation on both sides, tactically and strategically when it comes to Ukraine, which basically has access to as much ISR as the US has for the area at hand. So if we have to go through the current style of war, I think the real problem for Ukrainian military should happen when it comes purely on manpower with its defensive posture is not ready yet to happen. We should be roughly around end of 2025. Then you would have huge issues all over the front where the Russians could literally, with the current type of efforts, I'm not saying with the second army, literally what we're using right now, which is mostly company-sized assaults, they would try every single area of the front and they would walk. Next year, if nothing changed for Ukraine right now, when it comes to its enrollment, enlistment, next year, end of year, they're gone. If there is indeed a conscious effort for Ukrainians and they can load meat for 300,000, then Russia would need a completely different approach. They will themselves need to prepare more reserves, another round of refit for a lot of units, and then we're looking at least 2027 before the Ukrainians literally tap out. However, this relies on three things, which is the Ukrainians not changing qualitatively any kind of long-range fire, which is having ATACMS or storm shower doesn't matter, because those are like one-time hits, whereas the Russians right now are flying every single day. I'm saying between 30 and 40 UMPK missions, which isn't even big, like it's not that huge. It's 40 bombs. Of course, the explosive mass is huge, but if the Russians could fly 300-400 missions a day, that would be a complete different approach. But right now they're flying 30-40, dropping between 2 and 4, and that's it. It makes the damage. What's happening on Cheretino is mostly because they were able to concentrate that firepower in southwest of the city slash village, and they went through. But now for the rest, if indeed what's being spoken about, that Shoigu is organizing a extra army for the Russians, gonna equip it, gonna train, then you're gonna have a huge problem for Ukrainians right away. It doesn't matter what they mobilize, it doesn't matter what aid they receive. If there is a second Russian army, quote unquote, a invasion force going for up north, then yes, you're gonna have the biggest problem of your life if you're Ukraine, because you have already issues dealing with what the Russians have now, and therefore somewhere between March and May 2025, they're gonna have their breaking point with the FPVs, with HIMARS, with Hammer ASM-250, with whatever, with F-16. Because the ratio of losses and the attrition ratio on both sides is gonna go up and skyrocketing. The other problem that I have is that Ukraine cannot let itself cannot itself be pushed and backrolled like this. If this thing goes on and on and on, maybe this year already the Russians are in front of Pokrovsk. And if the Russians are in front of Pokrovsk, I'm sorry, but you're done. You are going to lose the Donetsk Oblast, and that's literally the political goal for the Russians. Once Donbass is free, they can turn around and start working on Zaporozhye. And of course, then you're going to have the problem of both Zaporozhye city and the northern Kherson Oblast, which would be blocked by the Dnipro. But if you attack Zaporozhye and get the city, and it's going to be a huge problem, then you have all the access possible and the capability to cross the Dnipro through Zaporozhye. And there you have your biggest problem, which is not even manpower, but which is the Russians having a solid foothold and way to cross the Dnipro. Once the Russians have that crossing available, your problem is that whatever you're going to defend on the flat, so on the eastern bank of the Dnipro, you need to quell that crossing first in Zaporozhye. Because once the Russians cross there, that's gonna completely suck out every single unit you will try to send and defend that point. Strategically, if the Russians get Zaporozhye, even half of it, Zaporozhye city, the war for Ukraine goes into a completely different dimension. Because right now, what is protecting them is the fact that for the southwest, they are covered by Dnieper, and up north, the Russians do not want an invasion force through their own border anymore. they're happy to see the Ukrainians fuck themselves up in Donbass and down south Zaporozhye and Kherson. But once they are in Zaporozhye and cross or have the crossing, then the Ukrainians need to rethink everything they're doing on the eastern bank of the Dnieper, because then the Russians could indeed try a northern offensive from Kharkov. It would be a bit stupid, but it would make sense strategically in the great scheme of things. It would still be stupid because that would require a lot of people for finally a rather finite object. Kharkov is very important for Ukraine and also for Russia, but it's a lot more important to control the crossings from southern Kharkov to northern Donetsk Oblast than be busy with Kharkov city itself. I hope that this replied more or less to your question. I'm sorry it was a bit long. Oh, okay. Z? Yeah, okay, guys. If anyone needs to ask anything else or discuss anything else, please be my guest. Yes, Z, I added you again. The hell?
Of Russia. When do you think is the right timing to launch it? So if the Ukrainian army is not very much exhausted, then maybe the big offensive wouldn't do the same damage as if there is exhaustion from the Ukrainian army. Also, there is second point. If the war continues on this pace, slow pace with attrition, it will require less attention from NATO as it is right now. On the contrary to, for example, a big push, which will require more attention from NATO and maybe troops there, etc.
Yes.
So, so do you think it's wiser for Russia to continue on this current slow pace until it is sure there is true exhaustion of the Ukrainian army, and only then launch the big offensive?
Well,
For example, from the second
yeah,
arm.
I understand. The problem with this is that your arguments have merit, and this was one of my points that I had, that if the Russians would accelerate their advance, then that would ring the alarm bells in within NATO, and then maybe they would do something reckless. However, my other problem when it comes to this is that um, the attrition war that the Russians are extolling on the Ukrainian forces right now is extremely hard on the Ukrainian people. Not as much because a lot of them are being killed, maimed, or wounded. That's one part, and it's part of the war. But mostly because the war right now was still fairly limited in Donbass, and also fairly limited on the kind of people that were getting involved in the war. According to estimates that we had based on what the Ukrainians had declared themselves, and all that, trapped iron is here, so it can even be a lot more forthcoming with that. We still find between that's my opinion, between 700,000 and 900,000, but probably over a million that were called in a way or another. We surmise, or at least I surmise, that 700,000 were combat troops, and the rest had any kind of military value or position, but they weren't at the front line. And if you start computing with what they might have lost, and if you want even to make a 1-1 loss with the Russians, then it makes complete sense that indeed, out of the 700,000, that were militarily engaged, you would have between 3 and 450,000 casualties, and therefore have this problem there that right now they're in the shit. And it completely makes sense. It completely makes sense that the Ukrainians are suffering. They have this problem of manpower right now, and they also have this. One of the problems they are openly talking about is not as much that they don't have men. They don't have all the men at the right places. So some units have been used as battering rams or tips of the spear, uh, shields left and right, and those are exhausted. Whatever is remaining behind them is not going to cut it for a defensive option or even counteroffensive, whatever. So for Ukraine, if this war attrition is palatable, no, that's not the case. They are getting absolutely thrashed, but they can sustain these kind of losses so far. As we saw, the line between their being able to sustain these losses and not is extremely thin. These guys were the ones who were mindlessly defending Stepove, then Berdishi, and caused a large damage to the Russians, and then ended up losing on a very cascading pattern. Ocheretino, at least half of the locality, Novokalinovka. Then suddenly Russians were at the gates of Chasov Yar. Ivanivske was cleared like nothing happened. Bogdanovka was lost. Pervomaisk was lost. Pobeda was lost. Nevelskoye was probably lost, but they don't want to fucking give it up. So you got this cascading momentum, and this is what I'm saying, that for the Ukrainians, none of them is a good option. But on one side, they can start mounting something and delay it, and which is also the most pleasurable for the Americans, because it still extolled a rather large loss amount to the Russians. But on the other side, a faster offensive from the Russian side, if indeed it breaks, might be a very good also point for the Ukrainians. Because in a sense, if they can retreat beyond the Dnipro, they can start quote unquote anew. The fighting that has been ongoing right now in Donbass is eating up resources they don't have. In a sense, a ceasefire, because the Russians start advancing, might be also a good option for them and for NATO as well. Maybe for an intervention, but mostly just to cool down the war and freeze it out in a kind of Korean way. Sorry if it was a bit long. Arme, it's up to you, man. Go on, my man. Arme 61.
Oh, okay. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
of course.
Does it sound
Yeah,
okay?
no problem.
Okay. I have like a couple questions, short ones. One is the Chinese export lots of electronics to the Russians now. If do you like the Russians imported like artillery ammunition from North Korea, you think, or what do you think they're not importing from China? Is it politically, or did they just not ask? That's number one. Number two would be like artillery barrels. Do you think the Russians are interested or just not interested in importing like artillery, new build artillery barrels from like China and North Korea? Number three, it's a little bit much. What do you think like is or what do you estimate is the barrel production that the Russians have like for tanks and for artillery? And number four, the last one, are the Russians still like increasing, like building new factories and expanding existing factories to increase production like of heavy heavy equipment, or do you think like just increasing the number of shifts and the capacity to maximum and a little bit more workers, and they don't think that they have to like build even more factories right now? Thank you.
First question: what is not exported from China? I think there is a silent understanding between the Chinese and the Russians that direct transfer of military equipment is not going to happen for as long as the US doesn't do anything stupid in that China-Russia relationship and China-US relationship. However, Blinken was already being an asshole, saying like we will make everything, we will make sure that you will stop this help that you are giving to the Russians through this war. So basically, we go back to these threats that are stupid because they voted I don't know, $8 billion dollars package to Taiwan. That's, I mean, it's a no go already. It's a dead in the water discussion. You just voted a direct military aid to a Chinese province in order for them to be separatists. Like, I'm honestly, I don't know what the fuck the Americans are thinking. Second part, the Russians are interested into D20 and a variation of it from the Koreans. I numerous times I joked about the KS-170. I do not think that the Russians are going to take it, mostly because they do not want to also escalate that aspect. But I do think that barrels are going to be imported quickly enough within next year. And then we go back to the third question, which is connects to this one. It is not because the Russians do not have the barrel capacity to produce, but it is exactly what they did with the artillery rounds. It gives them the readiness of a ready stock. Basically, they can still start producing their own barrels, and right now I surmise that it should be roughly between 1,000 and 1,200 barrels, be that with ready-made equipment. So basically, we will probably be looking at, if we have to trust Shoigu, between 400 and 500 MST barrels, which half are going to be within the chassis itself, so a full set, and about 100 probably to MSTS. When it comes to tank barrel production, on that one, the Russians should have at least 7,000 to 8,000 barrels remaining from the old days, because, I mean, we had 3 barrels from the Chinese per tank, and probably the norm for the Russians was 4 barrels per tank. And I cannot believe that they went through over easily 30,000 barrels like that. So when it comes to tank barrels themselves, I have no problem. They still have enough resources. But at least 300 to 400 barrels are produced because they need them for the T90Ms. As you know, those are different barrels. They need to have the notch for the laser muzzle reference system. So, we can see the difference on the undercut and so on. But generally speaking, yeah, the Russians right now should be between 600 and 800 artillery barrels as a production, and between, I think, 400 and 600 tank barrels. The tank barrel production is not because they cannot do it; it's just because they have a fuck ton of Soviet-era tank barrels laying around. However, they need to really be attentive with that because not every barrel is the same. Not every barrel has aged the same. And most importantly, they are going to get used very fast in case that the Russians stop losing tanks. Because one of the things that is using the barrels right now, but also not making them replace the barrels, is the fact that the tank is lost with the barrel in it. And therefore, you don't need to change it that often. Although you still need to fire over 800 rounds per tank before the barrel can be thought about being changed. Up to 1,200 for some ammunition. When it comes to APF SDS, that's roughly around 450, 500 probably. But because they do not fire those rounds almost not anymore, it's more OF rounds, basically high explosive or heat, and in some cases ATGM. So on that aspect, they both have the amortization capability, but also the amortization stock that go by. So the tank discourse and the artillery discourse are completely different. In that aspect, they are going to keep cannibalizing some artillery systems, but on that aspect, they need to produce between, in my opinion, 600 and 800 per year to be able to retain the capability. Also, we are not going to forget they should be starting to produce Koalitia. That's a completely different barrel, but it's also a completely different system. So we are to expect at least 40 kilometers from those barrels and for that ammunition, which means that a lot of the losses that we've had by HIMARS, counter batteries, shit like that, are less likely to happen because the fact that Koalitia is going to fire five automatic rounds, gonna get the fuck out, a bit like the Archer or the Crab or the Caesar, and then it's gone. So technically, it should make it a lot more complicated to lose those assets compared to a D20, which is at 20, 22, 24 kilometers with the extended range, or D30, or even the other ones, be that the Jacint B or the MST B. And finally, what was the last question? It was about.
The last question was, are the Russians still
The
increasing
production
factories? Yeah.
Honestly, I would for some things for sure, but comparatively, it makes no sense because the tankograds, if you were to just check the tank proms, those things are fucking cities. They just need to reopen wings for them. Artillery wise, just the same. The problem is the foundries. So some foundries need to be redone anyway. You need to reopen them, and on that aspect, I now understand about the Chinese machine tools imports all over 22 and 23. So I do not expect them for hardware to really expand. Where I do expect them to expand or open new factories would be like it happened for the Shahids slash Geraniums, or Zala, the Lancets, who started to operate from a former mall, is for new products. And one of the new products that is really needed right now, and I know that a lot of people are not going to be happy, is to fucking finally get rid of the current chassis of BTR. That chassis is not bad per se, it's actually extremely useful. It has good capability and so on, but the fucking engine placement is from the last century. So it needs to be completely changed. And they have a good option with BTR 20 or BTR 82 AU with the rear doors, slightly better general protection, the possibility to also mount side add-on armor and stuff like that. Those things would probably require new buildings, new venues, especially when you count the fact that the BTR 8 is not going to stop BTR-82 in this case, is not going to stop production. That will go as a adjacent value to it. For the rest, what can I say? For the rest, it's pretty simple. If they are serious about restarting the production of T80, then the foundry needs to be restarted. So there will be either a new building or an extension, but in Omsk, you're going to have a new, probably new area of production if they need to restart the T80 with, of course, an upgraded version, because one of the things that you need for the T80 is to get rid of the cast turret, but also to find a way to eliminate the hydraulic turret drive and hydraulic loading system, because that causes huge problems fire-wise and deflagration-wise. And of course, if a couple of minor adjustments can be made to the fuel lines of both ex-Soviet tanks, so T-60, T-64 is more for the Ukrainians, but T-72, T-80, T-90, that would be great, because the spruce line going through the left rear sponson is still absolutely an absolute nightmare. Drone hits there when you are, stop halted, hits right at the right spot, and the whole tank goes boom, because it has a direct path towards the spruce line, your fuel line from the engine towards the reservoir, the second reservoir in the rear of the hull, where you have also propellant charges and live rounds. And then once the FPV hit jet goes through there, you have Fiesta, and everybody inside the tank, maybe except for the driver, is dead. So if some changes can be also happening there, would be nice, if the production is to start, of course. One of the solution might be to have a fully automated bustle ammunition storage, and inside the tank to get rid of everything that would make the tank lethal for its crew. So yeah. So that was it, guys. If anybody else want to intervene, please be my guest. Meanwhile, I'm going to do another space for tomorrow. This one, the other space is going to be 100% tactical. So yeah, it's up to you guys. Just if you want. Okay, Z. Sorry, Z. It's up to you, man. Z, it's up to you. You can intervene, man.
So, what in the next 6 months? Which strategic capabilities do you think will be added or cancelled by both sides?
Uh, Honestly, one thing I spoke about was the Russian SDB. The Russians are lacking a lower tier um, air bomb akin to the GBU 39. There was a project with a double flying wing. In a sense, the UMPB 30 SN, which is being tossed by Su-34s, is a kind of Russian SDB. But honestly, I would like to have a lower yield bomb, but the problem is from which body, from which existing bombs, because right now the Russians are doing the most by modernizing or adding a modern guidance to already existing bombs. I mean, UMPK is exactly that. It's just a garage kit strapped on Soviet era bombs. That one, in my opinion, should help the Russians by allowing other planes rather than Sukhoi 34 to be able to overbomb. The Russians have Fab hundreds. Those could be used as a kind of lighter UMPKs, Russian SDBs, and also given how much impact the UMPK 500 has been having on the battlefield, the SDB would actually be interesting for close air support. So basically, given that the Su-25s already fly within the front line, they could just drop within 5 kilometers, deep up to 20 kilometers, and completely change the flexibility of the planes in question. Because right now, as I said, one of the things that need to change on the Russian side is the strike force. Strike force initially was 7 to 12 planes, according to Ukrainians. Then it went back to 24, then 30. Then now there are probably 40 Su-34s that relay themselves into Ukraine and work around the clock. If you can mount lighter, smaller bombs to Su-25s, then the Su-25s are going to be used in a much more useful and much more flexible role, dropping 2 to 4 of these smaller diameter bombs and helping out with actual, real close air support. Because so far, important air support was done either by, as I said, unguided rockets, either by bigger unguided rockets. Sometimes KH-25s, 27, 29s were used, but most of the time it was FARS or whatever kind of unguided rockets they have. So my biggest problem right now is the following: either we go the US way, so basically with the SDB, other than you start mounting on these planes, be that the Su-24 or Su-34, these new missiles that have been used a couple of times, mostly to helicopters. So this Daily 85. Uh, all of these things are exactly what you need at this moment. And the other aspect that is missing that I would like to see on the Russian side is, well, as I've usually said, is that the UCAS finally start making themselves felt. This was the case, is still the case when it comes to God damn it, to the border area, so Sumy, Kharkov, Chernigov, and so on. But at the other side, they are just going between 7 to maybe 15 kilometers within Ukraine. They do some damage, they pull out. If those UCAVs finally start popping out, as we saw recently into Varvarovka in Kharkov Oblast, if they start popping out at the front line, they can literally change the whole game plan. Because even, as I said, even if you lose 1 or 2 per week, and you are dealing with rather cheap UCAVs like the Modger 6 or the 4-post through, you're gonna still take out multiple targets at the time. So let's say that every 4-post makes 15 to 20 sorties before getting shot. If you are able to fire all the 4-post ammunition, so 3 to 4, depending how much you load them, it's still going to be 80 targets taken out. 80 targets taken out, the way this war is going with the quantities at hand, that means that a whole battalion, a whole Ukrainian battalion or brigade even, is severely damaged, if not outright taken out. And if you can do that with a single 4-post loss, it's a no-brainer. But so basically, first of all, small diameter bombs attached or dispensed by lighter, more flexible aircraft, more platforms to drop these distance bombs, UCAVs finally, and of course a deeper penetrating ISR threat. So basically, right now we saw they can go up to 120 kilometers deep without being detected or contested by the Ukrainians. If that can go up to 150 or 200, would be pretty nice, because then you have the whole rear echelon of the Ukrainian army under control, and then you can fire Iskanders at will. And then finally, cheaper long range fires. Firing Iskander at everything is a solution, but it's not the cheapest one. If you can have something akin to the to the Ukrainian Tochka or the Iranian ballistic missiles. I'm not saying the Iranians themselves, but just something cheaper that you can use to great effect. And in this sense, I think the novel warhead on the geraniums that is 90 kilograms of payload could be a way forward in that sense, especially if it's equipped with electro-optical seeker, which means that you are going to be able to find your target. And given that we have already a Zala or a Supercam going 120 kilometers deep, this makes it very easy for anyone to imagine what you can do with Shahid or Geranium, 100, 120, 130 kilometers behind the lines. It would be the perfect answer to HIMARS. So yeah, I hope the answer was perfect, or at least.
Yeah. Do you see any capability cancelled by the other side? Any major capability cancelled? So one.
What do you mean by that? That they're gonna contest from the Russians, or?
No, for example, we have a drone major issue for both sides. Can any one of the two solve it, like radically
Well,
find a
they have
solution
already
for it?
the
And then the
Russians have
same
already
Russian.
solved it. They just are not taking, in my opinion, advantage of what is already on the front line right now. If you saw the latest shutdown attempt by the Ukrainians, which was a Strela 10 towards the Supercam or Zala, I think it was a Zala, the Strela failed completely. The point of attack and point of interception that was calculated or shot down was at least 300 meters behind the Zala. And the Zala, okay, is not the biggest drone, but it's not the smallest either. That means that at that point, you could have been a UCAV flying 3,000 meters above the Zala, and you could have shot down that Strela with a Cab 20. And the damage wouldn't be a Lancet 1, Lancet 3 hitting that Strela. It would have been a Cab, which would be unopposable, because there is no electronic warfare to stop it. It's a gliding bomb going after a laser beamer. So on that aspect, I think the Russians are still being too cautious within 10 kilometers from front line. I think the UCAV will play a fundamental role later on the war, once the situation with the AD on the Ukrainian side would go and become worse than it is right now. Right now, as I said, the Russians are perfectly fine with a Zala or a Supercam flying 20, 30, 40 kilometers behind the line, and then dropping whatever they can drop to them. Krasnopol for the short range behind the line attack, X-85, KH-35, Iskander for high value targets and so on. So once again, this is what is scaring me right now, is that we are into a transformational phase where the Ukrainians are going to suffer a lot due to the fact that the Americans assumed the Ukrainians to be the underdogs, so they are not delivering some of the things that could make the Ukrainian strike force a lot more believable that's right now. Do not forget that the biggest air component of Ukrainian forces is the Baba Yaga, which is a fucking aggro drone with mortar rounds, with multiple rocket launcher system submunitions attached to it, with homemade heat rounds and stuff like that. Those things destroy a lot more equipment on the Russian side than their actual planes or helicopters or even FPVs. They are cheaper, they lose some of them, they work under Starlink and so on. So for as long as this is going to remain like that, and the Russians suddenly can start dropping UCAVs on them, then it doesn't matter. The whole war is solved in a sense. You don't need to discuss it anymore. The attrition phase is going to attain such heights for Ukrainians that it's going to stop. We saw how it worked like that in Mariupol. In Mariupol, the Russians had a complete free reign over the skies, and the outcome of that was that within a month, most of the city was gone from the Ukrainian control. And then, of course, there was the bullshit about Azovstal and so on. But think about how once the AD in a specific area being gone would impact the Ukrainians under attack from Russian UCAVs. I do not see anything else. One of the problems that might happen for Ukrainians is that, given to their weakness aviation-wise, they might try and force something with the F-16s with terrible results for them, like a whole strike package going down at once. 3, 4, 5, 6 planes. And this happened early in the war for them. Like, they would lose 5 planes in one day. So this is one of the things that I'm expecting, is that at some point the Ukrainians are going to try something with their newfangled F-16s, and they're going to lose every single one of them over time. I hope the answer was good enough.
Yeah.
No
Thank you.
problem. You're welcome. So, guys, thank you very much for being with me. Tomorrow is going to be a lot more technical, a lot more mapping. Hopefully, I would not bother you with that. But what's going on and what's the most important part to retain right now and think through is that the whole problem of the Ukrainian military right now is not solvable by money or equipment. The whole problem of the Ukrainian military is only going to be solved by the fact that someone is going to promise Russia that Ukraine is going to give up 20, 25, 30% of its territory. And that someone is the US. The US can escalate, but they cannot replace the Ukrainians fighting for their land. And unfortunately, there are less Ukrainians than Russians. It's as simple as this. Any kind of mobilization that Ukraine is going to attempt, if it's a mass one, it's going to be disruptive, it's going to be half-assed, and before they can stabilize both the mobilization and the front line, 3 to 6 months going to pass. And the situation will be beyond salvageable. And then a completely different investment will be needed in order for Ukrainians to have the capabilities to try and claw back what they have. If I was the Russians, I would go on the offensive for up until July 2024, as I said, and then I would see the initiative just to see where the Ukrainians are going to strike and how they're going to do it. And then I'm going to fucking start pounding them just like it happened last year. Start to take out their logistics, start to take out their tanks, start to take out their AAVs, and if possible, foreign ones first. Because those are the most complicated, both track and pull, but also replace.
I don't want to bother you, but could I ask a short
Yeah,
question?
please. No problem.
And this is about Belarus. And I have the impression, or like it looks like the Russians don't like have that much like training or maneuvers with them right now. Question would be why, and if you think that in the future, for example, that the Russians would, I mean, yeah, take more land, obviously, and there is a threat of Polish intervention or whatever the fuck. You want a stronger Belarus, right? And with the amount, like the amount the Russians are spending right now, just like a couple billions to our friend in Belarus would like you could like expand the Belarusian army like massively for, let's say, that scenario in 2 years or so, where you want a much stronger Belarusian army ready, you know, as a potential threat in that scenario for let's say Poland or the Baltics. So yes, that's one. And short, like how much is like are the Russians like buying from the Belarusian like defense industry? Like, is that did they increase it or yeah?
Actually, they increased. There was a small increase up until 2023, and then it magically stopped being reported. But the things that are being still bought from them are a lot of Pelen products, especially for the Sosna uh, sites, and also a lot of subcomponents. At some point, they were asked to produce Uragan rockets, according to the insider. This turned out to be bullshit because, yeah, for some reason, the Russians just wanted gauges from them and basically pipes, not the whole system. And also, as I said, the Russians have been going for broke with a lot of systems, whereas they could buy from Belarus, like the BRDM upgrade into the Cayman, sorry, that could have been extremely useful. Never happened, and this is probably because the Russians, as you said, in a sense, it would make sense to have the Belarusians ready to go, but on the other side, the point is to keep a balance within Belarus, because, in my opinion, whipping the frenzy of a potential entry in the war for Belarus, the way it was in 2022. Remember that everybody and their mother said that the Belarusian army, with its 30 or 60,000 people, was going to supply or supplement or support the Russian army in Ukraine. Would be a escalation. Yada yada yada. Never happened. The Russians do not need the Belarusian army to intervene in Ukraine. But where you are right is that the Russians need the Belarusian army to be extremely ready and capable to sustain some weight from any kind of intervention from Poland or whatever. However, the thing is that up until late 2023, there were multiple small unit training events with Belarus, where larger unit training events are more complicated, maneuvers and so on, is that the Russians themselves are training their army for an actual war. Whereas most of these maneuvers are unfortunately a lot of pokazua. I mean, people who know Russians, know the Russian military, will understand what pokazua is. But basically, it's nice choreographed movements that show part of readiness, but most of it show a predicted outcome. As we saw those maneuvers in Ukraine, well, they were large deficitary, and the result in 2022 was the one we know: uh, faulty planning, faulty execution. You know, driving in a maneuver 180, 200 kilometers is not the same thing as getting ambushed after 20 meters beyond the border, and so on and so forth. So, in a sense, the lack of those training maneuvers is not the problem. It's the other issues that we're seeing. The fact that more and more smaller tactical units training in Belarus, and I was waiting for the Wagner camp to foster a lot more interaction and see the Belarusians with something else, trying to look a lot more like the Russian army, with respect to it, intelligence in Ukraine, and also to its experience in Ukraine. The Belarusian army is still something like the Russian army prior to the war. Some lessons have been understood, others need to be tested on their own before they can go where the Russians are right now.
Learned by blood.
Exactly. They need to be tested by combat. Let's say it like this. And nothing's going to replace that. And you can see how deficitary most of the training that the Ukrainians are receiving right now in quote unquote clearing trenches, like from none other than the Danes. And you're like, guys, last time you went to war was in Afghanistan when you almost lost the Leopard 2A, whatever, to IEDs. What the fuck do you even know about warfare? But once again, when it comes to Belarus, that's the thing. I think that Putin is trying to keep that country in rather balanced option, try to not make them suffer too much due to the situation, although they are also afflicted by sanctions when it comes to sport, economy, imports, and so on. However, one of the things that I regret is that the Russians are not, taking some more juicy parts of that technical cooperation. So basically, the A-200 that is basically the Chinese missile. Why nothing has been done to at least have a whitewashing there? We have seen some rounds that look like Chinese 122 millimeter base bleed. That my theory placed them either coming from North Korea but being Chinese rounds, or from Belarus still being Chinese design rounds, because the filler for the propellant is obviously different. It's typically Russian propellant, whereas the explosive itself, I'm not really sure, but it wouldn't surprise me to be also a Russian mixture. Whereas the shape, the type of shell geometry, and also the base propellant would be Chinese, or at least Chinese inspired. Once again, the biggest problem with this is that the Chinese can help a lot, but people who want to be helped first help themselves. So the Russians are doing not so bad job, but there is always place for improvement. So guys, thank you very much. Sorry for bothering you too much with my blah blah. Tomorrow is going to be a lot more analytical, and we are going to do some mapping. But as it stands right now, the Ukrainians are in the verge of absolute catastrophe in northwest Avdiivka, and hopefully it happens. Thank you very much, guys. Have a very nice day. Bye bye.